I like, click, subscribe, do all that. You already know what time it is. It's Netflix time. This movie's called Homunculus. Truth and vision blurs when a homeless insomniac awakens from an experimental mental procedure with the ability to see people's innermost traumas. So this movie just came out. It's about 2 hours long. It's a very weird movie, but then halfway through it gets very traumatic. Spoiler alert, let's get it. So it starts off with a doctor doing this procedure, and he basically drills a hole into somebody's head. The fuck? Then we get this picture in the background. I'll explain who that is later. Then we got this guy sleeping in a suit with a thumb in his mouth. He goes by the name of Suzumi. He gets out of his car, and speaking of cars, not a whole lot of cars on the road, huh? Quiet Saturday. He goes over to this group of homeless people who they refer to him as H-Han, and he tells them they're having a funeral for this guy named Ken, who apparently he was supposed to be close to, but he never shed a drop of tears or anything like that. But anyway, he gets him a bottle of wine and goes about his business. So apparently before that, he went to this restaurant, this fancy restaurant, and started eating steak and lobster. And when he left, he purchased a bottle of wine. And he wrote it under his name, Suzumi. And then he gets back in his car. Then all of a sudden, this guy named Ito approaches his car. He wants to conduct an experiment on him, but he's like, man, get the fuck out of here. Then he mentions him by name, and he's like, yo, how do you know my name? Then he puts his flyer on his window. Apparently, he's the one that's been drilling holes into people's brains. Then he talks about how he goes back and forth all the time, like you're over here visiting the homeless, but then you're over here in the fancy restaurants. It's like, what's the deal? The crazy thing, we found out that Suzumi really is homeless. So if he's homeless, how the hell is he buying fancy food? Is he just got a stack of money just stashed up or something? When he paid for his food, he paid for it with credit cards. So again, why is he homeless? Well, Ito tells him, whatever you're ready, I'm going to conduct a 7-day experiment on you. Just let me know. He hasn't gone to see him yet, but they announced this as day 1. So apparently the next day when he was walking around, he found his car missing. Ito's in his face again, but this time he follows him to his apartment. He's got a bunch of wigs and disguises and glasses, but he does work as a neurosurgeon in a hospital, this hospital that his father runs. He's telling him about an experiment he wants to perform on him so he can see homunculi. And if you know anything about Full Metal Alchemist, you might know what I'm talking about. So after a convincing speech, he goes along with it. After the procedure's done, he wakes up back in his car. He wakes up to some money and a note from Ito saying, let's have dinner together. So they meet up at this spot, and he shows him a list about delving in psychology and all this stuff. Then he gives him a speech about humans only using 10% of their brain. It's like, oh, what if we could use the other 90? And if you could actually see homunculi, you're already using 36%. So he gets him to play a card game, and he tells him to find the star. But read it to your forethought, and you only use the left side of your brain. Ito's impressed that he finds all the stars. He said, yeah, you did good, but this is only a test. I'll be back for you later on. Now, the trippy part comes when he starts wandering the streets. Something gets in his eye and he starts seeing people differently. He sees this one guy that turns from fat to skinny, looks like a piece of paper at some point. And this one chick is skirt spinning with no lower body. I'm like, what the fuck? Then he sees some people turning into chains, boxes, computers. Lady head turns into a light bulb. This guy's head and body is a bunch of outlets. Yeah, it's some weird shit. Then he accidentally bumps into this guy who's like the boss of one of the Yakuza clans. And so just to be rude, he's about to cut this man's pinky off. But then he starts looking into his soul and his hand starts moving all on its own. And then they just dip out. So I'm thinking to myself, does this motherfucker have telekinesis powers too? Like, what the fuck? Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, when he saw his boss, he saw a robot. Yeah, the boss man. Anyway, Suzumi goes back to talk to Ito to try to get some explanation out of all this. And he basically tells him that he can see homunculi within people. Now, the homunculi looks like monsters, but it's really based off people's feelings, guilt, and emotions and stuff like that. Then he asks them to look at Tito and tells him what he sees. But when he looks, all he sees is nothing, so we just assumed he was invisible. He tells him he saw nothing, and Ito's that sad by his response, even though he could tell that he's telling the truth, because when he lies, his lip moves up something like that. So he's back in his car now. Apparently it's day 3 now, and he gets a call from Ito. And it's more Ito trying to explain everything he's been seeing. So from what I gather, he really needs Suzumi because he's done these practices before. Apparently he's the only one that can actually see homunculi. But he's got a spot he wants to take him to. So Ito takes him to this spot, but there's a bunch of college girls doing things. Nothing really perverted. I'm not even sure exactly what they're doing. Well, anyway, they go to a cafe after that. They spot one of the girls sitting there, and Ito goes to talk to her. So while they're talking, Suzumi uses his third eye and sees Ito as invisible, but sees the girl as sand, and the sand is absorbing him. I'm not even sure what to make of this. And after that, she leaves, but for some reason, Ito's got all these splotches on his face. When she was there, she asked Ito, was he scared or was he lonely? I don't know if it delved into his past or not, but he was pretty shook up about it. But throughout the conversation, somehow Ito snagged her phone and gave it to Suzumi. He told him just hang on to it and just monitor the calls. So when he gets back to his car, she's got a bunch of missed calls from her mom, but then he goes to her Instagram and sees a bunch of cakes and pies and shit. But then as he scrolls further, he sees a bunch of disturbing images, like she's got cuts on her leg and her lips, all this stuff. Talking about she need to become one. What the fuck going on with this girl? So while he's scrolling, remember the boss he ran into on the street? Well, apparently his goons found him sitting in his car. So they bring him up to the boss, and he sees him as a robot again, except this time he sees a boy through him. Suzumi's like, why are you hiding your pain? Just let it out. And the boss is so scared that Suzumi can see right through him. Then we get a flashback of him playing with his friend as a kid, and he picks up a sickle and his friend has his robot. So there's some symbolism of why he keeps seeing him as a robot and why he's so obsessed with sickles and knives and stuff. Then his chest starts hurting out the blue. And as you can see in his mind, he's peeling back layers of his persona. So what happened in the flashback, him and his friend were arguing over the robot. And in the process, he accidentally sliced his friend's finger off. Then he ran away. So not only does he see homunculi, but he really has the power to tap into people's psychosis. The boss is so overwhelmed by this that he quits the Yakuza. And to atone for his sins, he sliced his own pinky off. Because basically, that's how the Yakuza get down, you know what I'm saying? And then he lets Suzumi go about his business. He ends up meeting up with his boys in the park. Then he starts breaking down the value of human life. He, among others, obviously didn't want to hear this shit. The old man pushes him down. He's like, man, I'm not trying to hear this shit, man. He tries to see homunculi through them, but he can't, or at least they don't let us know. Then he gets a call from that girl from the restaurant who we now know her name is Yukari, asking to get her phone back. So she meets up with him in his car. Then we get this weird scene, I mean very weird scene, where he sees her as sand or symbols absorbing him. But in real life, she's kind of telling him to back off, but not really. Then he gets all these disturbing images where her head disappears and pops up in between her legs. And she's like, you're embarrassed because you're a virgin, huh? Or something like that. But in real life, she's kind of creeped out, but not creeped out. Then he's on top of her. Like, trust me, it's some off-the-wall stuff. Then she tells him not to look at her leg as it's bleeding. He licks it up for some reason. Then she starts kissing him. I seriously don't even know what to make of this scene. Then afterwards her mom calls, leaving all types of messages. Then this random chick walking around at night just comes to the window and shit. And she puts her foot on the window like, get the fuck out of here. She's like, how can they do this stuff here? Some people are just not raised right. But I'm like, what the fuck was you doing out late night anyway? Just having a flashlight, walking around and shit. I don't really know if she learned some type of lesson or something, but anyway. Day 4, he goes to the hospital to visit Ito. So as he's waiting, he's sitting down and he realizes he's picked up some of the people's homunculi. His arm looks like a robot, his leg looks like the sand. Then he sees his lady in front of him that has no face, and it tells him he's empty. He's like, what the fuck? She's startled by him, but not really, and this girl's about to become very important. As he gets a hold of himself, he looks back at her, as she's looking dead set at him, and he sees her at this bar setting with no face. Then he gets Ito in the car so he can go back to the apartment. Ito starts explaining to him about all the people or the pictures that are in his apartment, and he sees a lot of strange visions through him. Then Ito asks Suzumi to look at him again. And I guess because he's nervous, this time he sees him, and he looks like water with a bunch of bubbles floating up. But he tells him he sees nothing. Ito knows he's lying, but he changes the subject. Later on, he goes back to his car, and he finds his car with his name on it. Apparently, back then, he was a manager for a consulting company. And then we get a flashback to him just enjoying women, had a business suit on, and apparently he had money. And he looked over towards the bar, and it happened to be the same girl he saw at the hospital. So that's what he was envisioning. He went over to try to introduce himself, but then she was like, you're empty inside. He's probably thinking to himself, what the fuck does that mean? Then as she was pulling out, he stops his car. And she gets out and just stares at him. Then they got to a situation where they both rode in the car. This flashback has got to be going somewhere. So on day 5, he's posted up at the hospital, waiting on a lady that goes by Nanako. Now the whole thing is he can't really remember what he did in the past. Come to find out, she's had memory loss too. So they both drive to this spot. From what they tell us, this is the spot where he used to live at. I'm surprised they could just walk right in or whatever, like nobody bought the spot. He tells her he remembers some things and he was like, yeah, we used to live here together. Then we get a clip of them as they're staring into a solar eclipse. He gives her back this red dress that she always used to wear. But then she starts having flashbacks. And she has a flashback of a blood on the ground, somebody just dead as shit. And she's trying so hard to repress the memory. Then right out the blue, they kiss. Meanwhile, Ito's been trying to call Suzumi, who apparently left his phone in the car. Then he goes to the table and marks all these scales on his arm. Then we just see a goldfish on the table out of water, basically about to die. Next morning, day 6, Suzumi spent the night with Nanako, and we could consider him giving the business. That's right, that's what he did. But apparently after looking at her, he sensed that he can't see homunculi anymore. So he makes a dash over to Ito's spot. Nanako wakes up and finds him gone, but then she's checking out the dress and stuff like that, so she's just chilling at the house. Suzumi's digging through a bunch of paperwork, and he finds this picture right here. That guy in the middle is Ito's dad. So he calls up Ito trying to figure out what the heck is going on. And Ito tells him the experiment is almost complete. He's like, what are you talking about? Why is it I can't see homunculi anymore? He's like, apparently it transferred the truth all over to her. And before you know it, Nanako is going to remember everything. So as Nanako's trying on the red dress, she hears a doorbell. And oh shit, it's Ito at the door. So he's like, are you ready to learn the truth, Nanako? Or should I call you by your real name, Chihiro? She got different names? The fuck going on? So Suzumi takes it upon himself to drill a hole in his damn head so he can see homunculi again. And as crazy as that shit sounds, it worked. He goes to see her, but he's not seeing an empty face no more. He's seeing her, but basically seeing 2 different faces. Now, why is that? Then she confesses and says, I killed her. Killed who? Then we get this flashback with her and her boyfriend in the car. They were mad at each other about something. She was about to jump out the car at the same time this couple was running in the street. She falls out the car, a dude hits the girl, and he crashes into a telephone pole dead. Turns out the girl laying dead, her real name is Nanako. And her real name is Chihiro. Like, oh shit. And because his memory was so restored, he thought Chihiro was Nanako. And then we get these flashbacks to who Nanako really looked like, how they were watching the solar eclipse back then. Yeah, it was some wild shit. Then we get a flashback to why Suzuki and Nanako were out in the street to begin with. See, they were having problems at home, and on top of that, Nanako had a miscarriage. He was trying to chase after her, but she kept running away from him. And as she was running away, that's when Chihiro and her boyfriend's car was coming. Damn. Chihiro thought it was her fault that all this happened, man. That's a heavy burden to carry around with you. But he was like, your boyfriend was driving. This is not your fault. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to carry this around with you. He made sure she was good, put her to bed, and gets a one-on-one chat with Ito, who's sit back and enjoying all this stuff, expecting the unexpected. But then he looks into Ito and tells him what he sees. I see you to like water bubbling around with a goldfish around him, which Ito was now terrified because Suzumi's about to start reading into him. So then we get into the backstory about his father never paying attention to him. No matter what Ito did, all his father cared about was a goldfish. So one day as he was drawing, he knocks the goldfish tank over and watches it suffocate. But I feel like there's something more to it than just this. Ito breaks down and starts crying because all his life he's been ignored by his dad, never paid attention to him even though he was set out to do great things. But if this movie's taught me anything, there's always a metaphor in something. So I want to know the situation between him and his dad. They never really explained if he was still alive or dead. So after going back to the apartment, the last image we see of Ito is where he's on his rooftop, where he drilled a hole in his own head and sewed his eyes shut. So I can't even imagine what kind of homunculus and life that he's seen. As for Suzumi and Chiori, they ride out together. And they're a couple riding off in the sunset. The end. But now I'm left with questions. What is Ito seeing? What's the deeper discrepancy between him and his dad? It leaves our mind floating with endless possibilities. Homunculus on Netflix. Check it out, like, click, subscribe, do all that. You already know what time it is. Like DZ, mister. Big, you the goddamn slogan.